Man, Meghan looks a lot different when she thinks the cameras aren't watching.
There is a particular kind of moment that cameras were never supposed to catch. Not the posed smile at the top of the steps, not the carefully prepared statement delivered to a waiting press pool, but the fraction of a second between the public face dropping and the private one appearing, that unguarded sliver of human truth that exists before the mind has time to construct a performance. Those moments, when they happen to ordinary people, disappear unnoticed. When they happen to Meghan Markle, they travel around the world in hours. And what's interesting, what is genuinely worth examining carefully and honestly, is not just what those moments show, it's what we choose to see in them. Because the same 2 seconds of footage has been described by different people watching the same clip as evidence of arrogance, evidence of vulnerability, evidence of contempt, and evidence of heartbreak, simultaneously by intelligent adults who all believe they are reading the situation correctly. That tells us something important, not just about Meghan, about all of us. If you followed the royal story for any length of time and you found yourself wanting a more careful, more honest conversation about what we actually know versus what we've been told, stay with me. This channel exists for exactly that. And if that sounds like the kind of analysis you want more of, subscribing takes 1 second and means you won't miss what's coming. Because today, we're going to look at some of the most discussed, unguarded moments caught on camera, and we're going to do something that almost nobody does with this footage. We're going to look at it properly, in context, without an agenda, and ask the question that matters most. What was actually happening? Let's begin with perhaps the most analyzed piece of footage from Meghan's entire time as a working royal, the Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey in March 2020, the last official engagement before the Sussexes stepped back from royal duties, a day loaded with significance that everyone in that building understood. The footage is well known, the moment when Meghan and Harry arrive and the greeting between Meghan and Kate and the wider family plays out in a way that reads very differently depending on your starting assumptions. Watch it expecting coldness, and you find coldness. Watch it expecting awkwardness from all parties, and that's what you find instead. But there is a specific moment in that footage that gets discussed far less than the headline interaction. It comes approximately 4 minutes in. Meghan is standing, waiting in the way that royal engagements require a great deal of standing and waiting. And for just a moment, perhaps 3 seconds, she is not engaged with anyone. She is simply present in that space. And what crosses her face in those 3 seconds is not what most commentary has described. It isn't contempt. It isn't coldness. If you watch without the accompanying narration that most clips provide, what you see is something that looks remarkably like someone trying very hard to hold themselves together in an environment that has become, for reasons we can only partially know, genuinely painful to be in. And this is the part that most people missed. The context of that day was not simply a family service. It was, as we now know from multiple accounts, including Harry's own memoir and the couple's Netflix documentary, taking place against a backdrop of decisions already made and wounds already deep. The Sussexes had announced their intention to step back the previous January. The preceding weeks had involved negotiations with the palace that sources on multiple sides have described as bruising. This was not a family gathering. It was, in many respects, a farewell that nobody was openly acknowledging as one. Seen in that light, a face trying to hold itself together reads rather differently than a face performing disdain. That doesn't mean the interpretation is definitive. It means the simple interpretation, the one that travels fastest on social media, is almost certainly incomplete. The second category of unguarded moment that has generated significant discussion sits at the opposite end of the emotional spectrum, and it requires the same careful attention. During the couple's tour of Australia in 2018, the trip we've discussed before on this channel, the one that took place just after the pregnancy announcement, 19 days of engagements across multiple countries, there are multiple moments of footage where Meghan's reactions appear entirely spontaneous, entirely warm, entirely unperformed. A child in the crowd at a Sydney walkabout offers her a small handmade card. Meghan stops, fully. Not the practiced pause of a royal learning to manage crowds, but a genuine stop, the kind where the body makes the decision before the mind has processed it. She reads the card. Something on her face changes. Opens is perhaps the better word. And she looks at the child with an attention so complete that the hundreds of people around them briefly cease to exist. Body language analysts who have reviewed this footage professionally have noted something specific. The smile that follows is what psychologists classify as a Duchenne smile, the kind that cannot be voluntarily produced because it involves the orbicularis oculi muscle around the eyes contracting spontaneously. You can fake a smile. You cannot fake a Duchenne smile. The eyes either do it or they don't. In that moment, with that child, they did. What nobody talked about at the time was how consistent this pattern is across the Australian footage. Not occasionally, consistently. Every genuine interaction with a child, every moment where the public formality drops and a human exchange takes over, the response is the same. Unguarded, warm, real. This matters because it complicates the narrative that has hardened around Meghan in certain quarters, the narrative of a calculated performer who is always managing her image, always constructing her presentation, always several moves ahead of the genuine moment. That narrative may contain truth in some contexts, but it cannot account for what the camera catches with children. The calculation, if it exists elsewhere, does not reach that far. There is a third category of unguarded moment, and this one is harder to watch. Not because it reveals something unflattering, but because it reveals something genuinely painful. And painful things, when they belong to someone the public has decided to have uncomplicated feelings about, tend to make people uncomfortable. The ITV documentary, October 2019, Harry and Meghan are on tour in Africa, and journalist Tom Bradley, who has known Harry for many years, conducts individual interviews with both of them. The interview with Meghan has been discussed extensively for one particular exchange, but it's worth revisiting not for the words, which have been quoted and analyzed and debated at length, but for what the face does before the words arrive. Bradley asks a simple question, whether she's all right, whether the public scrutiny, the relentlessness of it, has been as difficult as it appeared from the outside. There's a pause before she answers, a brief one, but in that pause, something happens that cannot be constructed. The features rearrange themselves into the expression of someone deciding in real time how much truth to allow into a public space, whether to give the safe answer or the honest one, and you can see the decision being made, visibly, frame by frame. She chose the honest one, and what followed, the acknowledgement that it had been hard, that not many people had asked if she was all right, that existing rather than thriving was the more accurate description, was received by different audiences in completely different ways. Some found it manipulative, some found it devastating, some found it the first genuinely human moment they had seen from her. Here is what I think deserves consideration for anyone watching that footage now, with the distance of several years. The women in this audience, many of whom have navigated their own versions of being in environments where they were not welcome, where the rules were not explained and then held against them, where maintaining dignity under scrutiny came at a cost that nobody around them acknowledged, will recognize something in that pause. Not because Meghan's situation is ordinary, it isn't, but because the experience of deciding how much of your actual reality to make visible in a world that may not receive it kindly, that is not a royal experience. That is a human one, and that detail matters more than it first appears. Let's talk about something that doesn't get the attention it deserves when this footage is discussed. The moments that were unguarded not in pain, but in joy. Because those matter too, and they have been surprisingly underreported. The Invictus Games. Multiple years, multiple locations, but there is footage from the 2017 Toronto Games, before the engagement, when Meghan was attending as Harry's girlfriend rather than in any official capacity, that is worth looking at carefully. She is in the crowd, not the official section. the crowd, surrounded by families of competitors, veterans, people for whom the games represent something profound and personal. And the footage catches her between the moments she would have known she was being filmed. Watching a competitor finish a race, a man who has, it becomes clear from context, overcome something significant to be there. And the expression on Meghan's face is not the expression of someone at a public event performing appropriate emotion. It is the expression of someone genuinely moved, caught off guard by it, having to collect herself slightly before the next moment arrives. This footage predates the engagement by months. It predates the public role, the royal training, the apparatus of palace communications. It is as close to an unmanaged window as exists in the public record. And what it shows is a person whose emotional responses to human courage and human struggle are both genuine and significant. A person who feels, in the most straightforward sense of the word, what is in front of her. Whether that quality has always been channeled wisely, directed appropriately, managed well in the context of royal life, those are separate questions with complicated answers. But the quality itself appears to be real. Now we arrive at the question this script opened with, the one worth sitting with. What do we actually do with unguarded moments when we find them? Because here is the honest observation after looking carefully at years of footage, years of commentary, years of reactions from people watching the same frames and seeing completely different things. The unguarded moment doesn't settle the question of who someone is. It opens it. We come to footage like this carrying everything we already believe, every headline we half read, every opinion piece that confirmed what we already suspected, every conversation we've had with friends who feel as strongly as we do, and we see, genuinely, sincerely, what that accumulated belief prepares us to see. The footage of the Commonwealth Day service plays differently to someone who has read accounts sympathetic to Meghan than it does to someone who has read accounts critical of her. Not because they are dishonest, but because perception is not a camera. It is a lens ground by everything that came before the moment we look through it. This is not a comfortable observation. It doesn't resolve cleanly. It doesn't allow us to arrive at a verdict and close the file. But perhaps that discomfort is worth something. The women who have written the most moving comments on this channel, and there have been many, are not the ones who arrived certain. They are the ones who arrived curious, who wanted to understand something more fully, who remembered from their own lives that most human stories resist the simple version. They are also, many of them, women who remembered Diana, who watched another young woman be asked to carry more than was reasonable in an institution that did not always know how to protect its own, who are bringing that memory and the feelings it still carries to every frame of footage they watch now. That memory is not irrelevant. It is part of the lens, and acknowledging it honestly is part of watching carefully. What these unguarded moments tell us, taken together and looked at without an agenda, is something quieter than most coverage suggests. They tell us that Meghan Markle is a person of genuine emotional depth who is also a person capable of careful public management, that these two things are not contradictions, that the warmth with the child in Sydney, and the controlled composure at the Commonwealth service, and the cracking voice in the ITV interview can all belong to the same human being, because that is how human beings work. We contain more than one version of ourselves. We are warm, and we are guarded, and we are genuine, and we are strategic, sometimes within the same afternoon. The unguarded moments don't reveal the true Meghan beneath the false one. They reveal one more layer of a person who, like all of us, is more complicated than any single frame can hold. Perhaps the most honest thing we can say after all the footage and all the analysis and all the years of public debate is this: we are watching someone's life, not knowing it. There is a difference, and in that difference lives more grace than most of our commentary has allowed for, on all sides, in all directions, including our own. If something in this conversation stayed with you, if there's a moment we discuss but you see differently, or a piece of footage you think tells a different story, I would genuinely love to read it in the comments. The most interesting conversations on this channel have always started there. And if you'd like to continue this kind of careful, honest discussion about the stories behind the stories, you know where to find us.